Good morning and welcome to Essential Ingredients. So excited to sit down with our loyal listeners and anyone who is new and tuning in. Thanks for taking the time to tune in each week, whether you're new or just joining us for the first time. It means a lot to us, and we're so grateful. So, this week's episode is one you're not going to want to miss. It features a gentleman named Carmine who is in the beauty space. He's super interesting, inspiring, and has lots to share. We're going to learn a lot about the future of beauty. So stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss this.
Introduce yourself, Carmine. Tell everybody who you are and a little bit about your blog.
Absolutely. So I am a Brooklyn-based writer and copywriter and kind of brand guru, really, and a skincare lover. And I've had a long career in beauty that dates back 30 years. I got my start like on the sales floor as a cosmetic department manager, and ended up I was in beauty for quite a while in retail. And I have an I have an English degree, and I always intended to be a teacher. And so I had this side of me that was focused on language and writing, and I'm talking like I studied Latin in high school. I was that kid. And they converged. Like my passion for beauty and my passion for writing and language converged, and I became a copywriter, and then a brand expert, and then a blogger. And I wasn't ever intending to become a blogger, but I started the Skin Karma blog in 2016, I believe. Yeah, it was 2016. I was living in Jersey City, and it just kind of took off from there, to be honest. It just happened.
You didn't plan
And
on
a lot
starting a
of my
blog.
career is, yeah, a lot of my career is organic. Like these
Right.
things just happen. I never wanted to be in beauty. I had no skincare routine growing up. I used Clearasil on my face. I never used sunscreen,
Oh
and
my
it
God,
just,
Clearasil. I haven't heard that name in a really long
yeah,
time.
I just aged myself.
So did I, apparently.
I was talking to a founder on my podcast yesterday, and we were talking about the skincare habits of young people these days, and she had a very interesting point. And I know about all the rumblings going on in beauty about how young people, 12-year-old girls and boys even, are using these really aggressive skincare products on their skin. And she said, that bothers me, but at the same time, I have to think back to what I did to my face. And she said, I use Stridex. And I said, oh my
Oh my
God,
God.
the same. Like, it's rubbing alcohol. And is it worse to use a retinoid than it is to use rubbing alcohol? Like, I don't know. It was such a good point, right? Like,
No, definitely. I mean,
wow.
when we're in those products that we use, the Stridex, I can see the packaging. It almost
Yes,
reminds me of nail polish remover. If you've seen,
absolutely.
right?
Acetone. Yeah.
Acetone,
Yeah.
same thing that we're putting on our face. So now we fast forward and here we are, right?
At least they're using sunscreen. I mean, we were doing that and not using sunscreen.
And
So,
people are using oil on their body, baby
yes.
oil.
Yeah, and sunning with it. And it was just the other day where I was talking to a friend and remembering Miss Shara. She was my 6th grade teacher, and every day at lunch she would go outside with like the 3rd grade teacher, and in a lounge chair with that big foil wrapped over the
Oh my,
cardboard, and sun herself while we were racing around her on the playground. Can
oh
you
my God.
imagine that happening today?
No, not, I mean, it's funny because, we're also sensitive to the sun and, skin cancer and wrinkles and aging and all sorts of things. And I know that, everybody that you talk to, whether a dermatologist, are always like, make sure you use your sunscreen. Does your moisturizer have SPF? And that was not a thing, right? I mean, SPF, we might use like 6 or 4, right?
Yeah. I'm not going to get a tan. I'm going to use a 4, and certainly not going to use it around your eyes. And I have this conversation with people all the time. I had a friend come up from Florida He moved down there after COVID, and he was talking about how he had, is it IPL, where they remove dark spots in your complexion with lasers? And I'm like, could you just use sunscreen and prevent the dark spots from forming? I mean, it's so hard to read. He's like, I had to go back twice to get certain ones. They were so deep. And I said, and you've got to start using sunscreen in your eye area. Everybody's worrying about, burning their eyes, getting sunscreen in their eyes, and then they don't use any sunscreen. And that really bothers me because it's the most delicate skin on your face. And you're leaving the most delicate skin on your face exposed because you don't want it to burn your eyes.
It's like when, this is going to sound weird, but you can either buy makeup or buy skincare. And I buy skincare that makes your face look better, so you don't have to buy the makeup.
So you don't have to mask it all your imperfections and photo damage with makeup.
Exactly.
Imagine, right?
But when you were saying about the eye thing, I have a problem with that too. Depending on makeup, I have to really be mindful of what's in it because my eyes get all red and runny, or I'm just
well, the trick is to use a stick. They don't market them for eyes. They market them as a sunscreen on the go in a stick form. And the reason they don't market it for eyes is because nobody wants to buy sunscreen for the eyes. So they market them for the whole face, but they have a really, really thick texture. They go on like a deodorant and it stays put. Now, I don't wear eye makeup, so I don't know like the nitty gritty details about how well these sticks layer. Some of them are much more emollient. There's one from Glow Recipe that's super emollient that I love. I think it's called Watermelon Dewy Bomb or something, SPF 9000. And it glides around the eyes, and I'm assuming that you can apply makeup over it because it's not drying. It's very emollient. But that's the trick. That's my hack. Those sticks.
Try it as we're coming into summer, right? Because I mean, it's nice here all year round in where I am in Northern California, but the truth is the sun is out all the time, right? It's out a lot. There's still, whether it's 40 degrees or 80 degrees, it's still important to do this. So I'm curious because there's been so many conversations around the ingredients in the products, right? So they talk about the natural ingredients and they talk about biotechnology. They talk about, not getting some of the stuff, but it's not really going in your bloodstream anyway. So I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll tell you, my first thought is always, if you find a sunscreen you love, use it. It doesn't matter. It's secondary, whether it's chemical or mineral. If it's mineral and you love it, that's terrific. And I have tons of mineral sunscreens that I love, that I've worked on, branding, packaging, that I recommend all the time. But if you find a sunscreen you love, it's a, $10 Trader Joe's chemical sunscreen. I don't know. I don't even know if that exists. And you love it, go for it. Use it because 90%, this is from the Skin Cancer Foundation, 90% of visible changes to the skin are caused by UV rays. And that's why I talk about how, the best anti-aging product you have in your medicine cabinet is sunscreen. And just because brands don't market sunscreens as anti-aging doesn't mean that they're not the best anti-aging product. Marketers created this category called anti-aging so they could sell you more expensive creams.
Right.
And for most of the time, they don't really do anything but moisturize. And so primarily, to me, is about finding a sunscreen you love. Secondarily, yes, there is some evidence coming to the fore that chemical sunscreens do seep into, because the whole point of a chemical sunscreen is that it gets absorbed by the skin and it blocks UV rays that way. Physical sunscreens don't get absorbed. They sit in the very top surface of your skin. So like anything you apply, it gets into your body. And so if there's chemical filters and they're not good for you, long term, then that's a problem. But to me, there's so many other things going on in my day that are not good for me long term, that the last thing I'm worried about is chemical sunscreens. I'll tell you, you know what I'm really starting to worry about is microplastics and,
Oh my God,
breathing,
yeah,
like
awful.
breathing all of that stuff.
I do want to go back so that the folks
Yeah.
that are tuning in, we can talk to them a little bit. And
Yeah.
if they were to, just ask you, you got into blogging and originally you started in housewares. Is that correct?
I did.
And you,
Yes.
okay. But, I
I,
think that people really do make these leaps and make these jumps and
yeah.
they don't necessarily think they're like, I don't know how to do that. I'd love
Yes.
to hear like what that journey was like for you.
Talk about imposter in your job. I mean, I went from Stridex pads to, assistant manager of cosmetics. That's a
Oh.
leap. So right after college, I moved back home. I went to college in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I moved back home to Connecticut for about 8 months, I guess. And
Mhm.
in that period, I started a part-time job at a department store in Connecticut as the assistant manager of housewares. And I loved it. I loved, like, straightening and filling in the cutlery sets and, all
Right.
of that stuff. I remember they used to compliment my cutlery wall. And and then I knew that I wasn't staying there, and my college roommate had moved to LA. And when I was growing up, I hated the cold. I still hate the cold, but it was like I'm 10 years old waiting at the bus stop in my two guys puffy coat, shivering to death, thinking the second I can get out of here, I'm going to California. And I would just fantasize all the time. Either aliens were taking me or I was moving to California. One of those had to happen. And I followed my college roommate out to LA. I actually went out there. It was the middle of February. It was 28 degrees in Connecticut. And I landed in LA and I came out of baggage claim at LAX onto the sidewalk. And you would have thought that I was in purgatory. Like, I could not even believe it was heaven. I couldn't believe how warm it was. And so I get out there and I had transferred my job to a department store in LA, a sister company of the department store that was here. And I go to HR and they're like, "You're good. Everything is set, but we need a favor from you before we put you in housewares." The cosmetic department manager is brand new. She's young. Of course, I was 22, so she was 22 and a half. And
Oh, okay.
yeah, she was my age. And we just finished Mother's Day, and it was a disaster. It was really tough. This was a very high visibility flagship store for May Company. Do you remember May Company?
Yeah, I
It
remember
was,
everybody got a job at the that's where they wanted to
yeah,
get jobs right
yeah,
after college to get into fashion or
mm-hmm,
merchandising or buying, the buying programs.
totally. This was May Company at Wilshire and Fairfax, where the
Wow.
LACMA Museum is now, or the Motion Picture Academy Museum is now. In that corner with that big gold, that was a fragrance bottle. That gold thing on the corner was a replica of a fragrance bottle. And so I was like, "You want me to go to cosmetics?" I said, I don't know anything about cosmetics. Nothing. I had an Aramis fragrance, that classic Aramis fragrance that my mother bought me at, G Fox at the department store I was working when I was 16 years old. And the reason she bought it for me is because the girl behind the counter told her it was an aphrodisiac. And that excited my mother. Oh my God, maybe he's going to start having an interest in women. Um, Aramis did not work. And so I was like, yeah, I guess so. I mean, I had no choice, right? They had transferred
Right.
me. So I went down to the sales floor and I was the assistant manager of cosmetics for 2 days before I went back upstairs to HR and I asked her if I could stay. And she was like, well, sure. I loved every second of that job. it was amazing. It was dynamic. There were, there was always something amazing going on. And there were all of these people. Like if I'm up in housewares, like I'm on the floor by myself usually.
Right.
But I'm here and there were all these incredible women who were very senior. Most of them were in their 60s or not, if not 70s. They were counter managers on Elizabeth Arden and Germaine Montet and Ultima 2, and they'd been there for 20, 30, 40 years in this
Mhm.
department store. And they kind of took this kid, this 22-year-old kid who knew nothing about beauty or cosmetics or skincare, under their wing, and they all taught me everything they knew. Like that's
Wow.
how I got my start in beauty, like learning from all of these incredibly experienced and intelligent and passionate women. They loved what they did, and they made me love what I did. And so I was literally on that sales floor as the assistant manager of cosmetics for 9 months before I got promoted to my own store. They were opening a brand new store in Northridge, and that was my baby. I was the cosmetics manager in this brand new store, and it was amazing. And I had Charles of the Ritz custom powders. I mean, it was like the first time a brand had custom powders, and you could come up to the counter and we would customize your face powder. It was so cool. And so I did that. I did that for, I think it was 4 or 5 years at May Company. And then I realized I really want to stay in this. I love being in this industry. And there was one glaring problem, and it was that May Company did not have the big three. They didn't have Clinique, they didn't have Lancome, and they didn't have Estee Lauder. And I knew that's where it was at, and I needed that. And so I jumped ship and I went to Bullocks in Century City, where I was the cosmetics manager, and I had Lauder, Lancome, and Clinique.
And then
I
how'd you end up in blogging?
Yeah, so I from there I ended up at Barneys. I was the
Oh,
cosmetics manager at Barneys Beverly Hills, RIP. Um
I know. I,
and
I gotta say, my heart was with the one on 17th Street
oh, of course.
because that's where
Yeah.
I grew up, and my mom would go shopping, and I'd go shopping with her. And then
I'm sure
as
that
I
was
grew up, it was the
magical.
one on Madison.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
So
so sad.
Kiehl's was my number one brand. I never heard of Kiehl's in my life. I came from the Lauder Lancome and Clinique world, remember?
Yeah.
And so we had Kiehl's, and the day the store opened, Mr. Morse had flown in, and with his daughter Jamie, and they came into the store in their leather bomber jackets, and I was so enthralled by that. I was like, you people are wild, and like I fell in love with Keels, and it wasn't soon after that that they had created a position as a copywriter in New York in their New York offices. They'd never had a copywriter, and I flew back here to interview for the job. I got it on the spot, and they were like, "How soon can you start?" How soon can I start? I live in LA. Like, what? They gave me 10 days. L'Oreal gave me 10 days to move to New York, and I did it. I drove across, I sold my car. I sold my car in those 10 days, packed up the house, said goodbye to all my friends, and drove to New York in a U-Haul. And I was at Keels in house for seven years or so before I branched out to do my own thing, and that was in 2008, I
Hmm.
think, 2008. And while I was doing my own thing, starting my own agency, Party of One, where I've worked on probably 100 brands at this point, um, helping them refine their brand identity or create their brand identity from scratch, and work on product naming and packaging. Then I started, looking at blogging, and it actually happened this one day. I was scrolling my Instagram feed, and I saw this one post, and it was a shelfie back in the day when shelfies were hot. It was a shelfie, and this person's products were all pink. it was a pink shelfie. All the products were pink. Whatever brand it was, if it had a pink product in a pink jar and a pink lid, whatever, she had it in her cabinet. And I was looking at the comments, and everybody was so enthralled with this. And it horrified me that anybody would think that a pink bottle meant that the product inside it was any good. And I thought, my voice needs to be in this because I have all of this experience. I've worked in house on a brand, and I've worked on the sales floor. I know this industry inside and out. I know, how to make a skincare product and what drives a skincare product and what drives efficacy.
Mhm.
And I just started a blog. That was a Saturday morning, and I remember, I was texting a friend of mine, and we came up with the name Skin Karma. I don't even remember who she might have done it. It was, the creative juices were flowing, and it was like Skin Karma. And I went over and I created a new account, on Instagram called Skin Karma, and that's how it started. And I haven't stopped.
That's so fun. And I think that, it's interesting as you're telling me this story,
Hmm.
I'm remembering when I started my company and then I went home and made a website,
Mm,
right? Because somebody asked me if I did something and it sort of all exploded after that. And I think, we have a lot of founders that tune in and watch this podcast, right?
yeah, yeah,
And everybody always expects that, like, you put together a business plan, it was really thought out. And I'm not saying that that doesn't occur. I'm
yeah,
not.
yeah,
But I'm saying as much as that occurs, this occurs.
yeah.
And I think it's really important to tell people that because I think, sometimes they get stuck in their own way.
I honestly am so fortunate that I found what I loved at 22, and I have not stopped, and I have continued to do that. And I think this all the time when I'm in the cafe or I'm at the movie theater or, the post office or wherever, and you come across someone who's being paid to do what they do in front of you, right?
Mhm.
And I always think to myself, do they love it? Do they love doing it? Can you tell? You can usually tell that they don't love doing what they're doing. And
Yes.
anytime I've gotten myself to a place, it's happened, where it's mostly when I get elevated to a management role
Hmm.
that I realize this isn't what I love doing. What I love doing is, writing and creative, like coming up with cool ideas and refining brand identities. I don't want to manage anything.
Well, it's interesting what you just said. It's that you like to, you can create the brand. You don't need to own it and run it on a day-to-day basis. And I think that sometimes people forget that they can develop something and then get somebody else to run it because that's not their core competency. If you have a great idea, there's no reason you could sort of say, I'm going to sell it, or I'm going to be on the board of directors, and you can still do what you love. Or for you, like, you help brands, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely. That's
so
my
that's
expertise.
your expertise. And
Yeah.
and if you had one of our founders calling in or asking you, you know um, I want to build a new brand, I'm interested in launching a new brand, what are some of the things that they should consider before they take the leap?
Well, first they should ask themselves if they really want this. Because I talk to founders a lot on my podcast, and it's grueling. It is
Mhm.
very challenging, and you wear a lot of hats, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about all the sexy stuff, the packaging and the product naming and trying 500 versions of this serum with peptides in it. That's that's the cool stuff. And if that sustains you, great. But you have to have a point of difference. That is
Mhm.
so key. It has always been the key, and it always will be the key. No matter the competition, you have to stand out. And if you have a point of difference and a point of view on beauty, skin, all of that. If you're focused on skin barrier health, great.
Mhm.
Then focus on skin barrier health because there's a
Right.
customer for that. If you're focused on, eczema and helping people with super dry, sensitive skin, that's your niche. You can't be all things to all people, and
Right.
a brand can't be all things to all people. I mean, certainly it can be as it gets big and there's tons of money supporting it,
Yeah, no, I agree. And innovation is so big these days, right? And they're trying to do things with better for you products, and then they're trying biotech. So I'm curious, with all of that in mind, right? You just judged at the beauty award at the Beauty Matters Awards. What was like the top three innovative things that you're seeing?
Last summer when I reviewed, I think it was 200 products, there were a lot of sunscreen innovations, which I love, and a lot of peptide innovations. Peptides and then adjacent, actives like growth factors.
Hmm.
There was a lot of that. And, I think that we're seeing exosomes come to the fore this year. That's like the hot ingredient of the year is exosomes.
Right.
And so I'll probably be inundated with exosome serums. And I see this escalating and becoming clearer, and that is skin health. And I know that sounds like that sounds so vague, but it's not, because skin health really requires a few elements, and first and foremost is sunscreen. And the number one reason people give for not using sunscreen is they hate how it feels on their face. They're completely willing to risk all the sun damage and skin cancer because they can't stand how sunscreens feel. So when I see brands innovating with sun care products that are pleasurable and that make you want to use them, like one just came across my desk like a week ago, and I'm really like obsessed with this. And I thought this morning, like, I have probably 20 facial sunscreens that I can reach for in the morning. And I was like, "Oh my god, I want to use this one. I really love the texture. I love the whole experience of it." And that's not easy to achieve with a sunscreen. Like, sunscreen development can take 2, 3 years.
So for our friends that are tuning in and people in the industry or people that are just curious about how to approach sunscreen this summer, is there anything that you think, besides that it feels good and that they're going to use it, that they should look for in their sunscreens?
Honestly, I think SPF is overplayed. I think an SPF 30 is fine. I can't remember the exact numbers. SPF 50 blocks 98%. I guess I do remember 98% of UV rays, and SPF 30 blocks 97%. It's negligible. It's
Right,
1%. So if you find an SPF 30 that you love and it's a mineral sunscreen, you can find pleasurable mineral sunscreens. It's at SPF 30. It's SPF 50 that's the real issue. Um, that's key. And and pair it with a sun stick like we talked about earlier,
right.
that you can use in your immediate eye area. I'm talking about in here right up to the eyelashes. Like, this all
Mhm.
needs to be protected, all of
Right,
it. And that's the reason why we show age on our face around our eyes first,
right.
because that's the thinnest skin, and it's exposed for the longest, and it breaks down. So those are key. I'm not really that big on applying sunscreen again throughout the day. I'm
Just
not,
once.
I apply it once in the morning.
Before we wrap things up, I know that, we have people that are innovating in this space that are listening and tuning in. And so, I imagine, I always try to think of the questions that they're coming up with, right? So, one thing that came up for me was, are there any beauty fads that you think died out before its time?
I thought there was something to skin cycling, but that petered out. Do you remember that? It was like two
No,
years ago, where
skins.
yeah, it was really about using actives, really potent actives, on specific nights of the week, and then giving your skin time to rest the night after. And I liked that. It made sense, and I felt like it was easy for people to follow, because people are, of course, confused about their skincare routines and what their skin needs. I thought that was cool. I feel like slugging should have stayed around a little bit longer. I'm a big fan of petrolatum, Vaseline. Yeah, La Mer, number two ingredient is petrolatum, aka Vaseline. And it's those, probably those two trends. I'm trying to think, like, what other trends disappeared, and I had just written about this in my blog a few weeks ago. I'm glad that the peptide trend is not a trend. It seems to be enduring, and people are incorporating peptides into their skincare routines regularly. I think that's a big deal. Um, I do think that there are ingredient trends that need to go away. Like the hyaluronic acid thing is crazy to me. Like when you look at the science, hyaluronic acid does not penetrate the skin barrier. It stays in the top surface layer of your skin and is supposed to draw water from the air, but it doesn't draw water from the air when the air is dry in New York City. It draws water from deep down in your skin and pulls it forward to the surface where it evaporates out of your face.
Does it matter
So
what percentage it's at?
it should be at 0%.
Should be at
I
0.
don't
Okay.
use I don't use hyaluronic acid at all. I don't think
Okay.
it's good for your skin health. I think it's like a fake like sensorial
Right.
experience. It makes your skin feel soft and plump, and all of these high-priced anti-aging products, that's what they do. They make the surface of your skin feel soft and plump, but they don't really do anything else to moderate aging or anything deeper than that. They're skin deep.
They're skin deep. Carmine,
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you to our listeners, our followers. It was a great conversation. I learned so much, and I am going to stay tuned for those
Okay,
recommendations.
they're coming your way, I promise. I'm going
Okay,
to
and in the
email them to you
meantime,
right
for those
now.
folks that want to tune into your podcast, where could they go find that?
You can find me on Apple Podcasts and Spotify at Skin Karma, SKINCARMA, or my blog at skinkarma.com and on Substack.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Justine. This is awesome.
Thanks for tuning in today, whether you watched it on video at YouTube or you downloaded our podcast at Essential Ingredients. We're so happy that you tuned in. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at justine.reichman at essential.ingredients. Stay tuned as we have a new episode every week that goes live on Tuesday.